Hello, this is Christian Idealism, and today we are going to be going over why idealism is not counterintuitive. This is, of course, brought to you by Cal Allender. So first, one of the biggest and most common barriers for people accepting idealism is that it is counterintuitive to a lot of people. This has caused many to be resistant towards the view, and would rather hold to views like substance dualism in order to accommodate their intuitions about the universe. In this video, I argue that there is no good reasons to think that idealism is counterintuitive, and that once properly understood, idealism can in fact be more intuitive than the ontologies of substance dualism and physicalism. And so, first of all, what is intuition? Well, intuition is the gut feeling that someone has about reality. It works kind of as a priori piece of evidence for something. Now, intuition is not an indicator of truth, but it does have a say in the prior probability of something being true, and if something is intuitive, then it should be believed if there is no evidence that successfully refutes it. And so there are things that are intuitive that are certainly true about our world. A good example would be the belief that you exist as a thinking thing. But there are also things that are intuitive that are certainly false about our world. For example, the belief that the sun rotates the earth. And so why is idealism considered counterintuitive? Well, the reason is that it seems, at least initially, that the world is physical, that our universe is filled with material atoms, and that all that exists is independent of our conscious perception. Idealism makes the opposite claim in that the world does not exist without consciousness, that the universe is all mental, and that material atoms are not material in the sense of them being beyond consciousness, but rather that they are the thoughts that emerge from consciousness. It is intuitive also that the world that we see is all that exists and is fundamental in the sense of being the only reality. However, I would argue that we must invert our intuitions to understand that idealism is not counterintuitive. And so, first of all, there is a difference between the intuition of an objective reality and the intuition of a mind-independent reality. The intuition of an objective reality is much stronger, I would say, than the intuition of a reality beyond the mind. First, we know that science can study the objective world and that things will happen to us regardless of how we feel or how our consciousness perceives it to be. A good example would be natural laws working in regular ways that are independent of our consciousness. Idealism is compatible with the existence of an objective reality. This is called objective idealism, where instead of everything existing only in our perceptions, there is a world beyond our personal consciousness or perceptions, but that this quote-unquote objective reality would still be mental. In the same way that under physicalism there is a world beyond our brain senses, there is a world beyond our consciousness. But what is beyond our consciousness under objective idealism is not a reality beyond the ontology of consciousness, but rather that a world that itself is mental and has this objective consciousness that exists beyond the consciousness of human beings. And so let's assess the intuition of a mind-independent reality for a second here. First, the intuition of a mind-independent reality is not very clear, since mind by itself is more foundational in what we know about reality, and mind-independent matter would be secondary to our knowledge. A good example would be we need a mind to perceive a mind-independent reality in the first place. And so simply asserting that a mind-independent reality is intuitive does not demonstrate it to be intuitive. We can demonstrate through our own thoughts that mind exists, which makes mind more intuitive, but we cannot demonstrate a mind-independent reality without making additional unnecessary assumptions about intuition itself. While we can demonstrate that there is an objective world, which is laws working in ways that act independent of our minds, we cannot show that the ontology of these laws, let alone that the stuff in the universe, is independent from mind and consciousness as its own ontology. In other words, there's no intuitions that give us good reasons to assume that there is an ontology outside the ontology of consciousness and mind. And so thus, given that there is a clear difference between an objective reality and the reality that is mind-independent, since idealism is compatible with an objective reality and the intuitions behind it, then there is no good reasons to have the intuition of a mind-independent reality, then therefore there is no intuition against the notion of idealism. And so, what is the intuition of idealism? Now that we have shown why idealism is not counterintuitive, we can actually have good reason to think that it is intuitive to reality. First, we mentioned before that mind is more fundamental, or more foundational to our knowledge. We know that minds do in fact exist. This is simply undeniable, since to convince oneself that they don't have a mind, they would require a mind. It is simply properly basic to say that the mind exists. However, it is not properly basic to say that a mind-independent reality exists. While one can make a case for an objective reality to exist, there is no way one could do the same for a reality that exists independent of mind, let alone a reality that has an ontology that is different from the mind. So therefore, we can know from intuition alone that a mental reality exists, whereas we cannot know from intuition alone whether there is something beyond mental categories. And so the properties of the world we experience in our everyday lives can easily be reduced to mind. Since all that we experience is a mental world of qualia, sounds, tastes, colors, shapes, and feelings, none of these are physical. These are all mental phenomena. It's only when one assumes there is something physical or non-mental that these experiences are assumed to be correlated or caused with a world independent of mind. However, this is only an assumption of reality and is not demonstrated. We essentially only experience a mental world, and there is no reason to have a separate physical or non-mental world beyond these mental experiences. And so, to give you a quote by Keith Ward, it says, quote, "Any physicist will say that brains are mostly empty space, in which molecules, atoms, electrons, quarks, and other strange particles buzz around in complicated ways. It seems as though physical objects, when not being observed, have no colors and no sounds, smells, tastes either. Sounds, like colors, are not physical events. Neither are smells, tastes, or sensations. Things do not smell like, taste like, or feel like anything when nobody is smelling, tasting, or feeling them. The physical world, it seems, is totally vacuous. No colors, sounds, smells, tastes, or sensations. What on earth is left?" And so that's kind of my point. So now, couldn't you make the argument that intuition is subjective? Well, intuition is different than how one feels about a topic. People have different feelings about things, but they don't always align with intuitions. With intuition, it is always about what seems to be the case before one looks at the evidence, regardless of how they subjectively feel about a topic. And so to have a strong intuition means that they have reflected and thought about it a lot and has come to a rational conclusion regarding intuition before they can look at the evidence about the intuition. So intuition is not just pure subjective feelings, but rather they are rational, carefully thought out ideas that should be believed if no evidence successfully refutes it. And so summary so far. To summarize, we took into account a common objection and barrier to idealism is that it is counterintuitive. However, there are several reasons why idealism is not only counterintuitive, but in fact it is very intuitive once properly understood. So first, there are clear intuitions that reality is objective and exists independent of our conscious awareness. Many people have assumed that accepting idealism means rejecting an objective reality. However, there is a difference between the intuition of an objective reality and the intuition of a mind-independent reality. Idealism is compatible with an objective reality, since there is an objective consciousness outside human consciousness that controls reality, but it is not compatible with a mind-independent reality. Number 2, the intuition of a mind-independent reality is not very clear. Since mind by itself is more foundational in what we know about reality, and a mind-independent matter would be secondary to our knowledge, we cannot demonstrate a mind-independent reality without making additional unnecessary assumptions about intuition itself. Number 3, the properties of the world that we experience in our everyday lives can easily be reduced to mind, since all that we experience is a mental world of qualia, sounds, tastes, colors, shapes, and feelings. None of these are physical, these are all mental phenomena, and so there is no reason to assume that there is a separate reality that are causing these mental events. And finally, intuitions are not just pure subjective feelings, but they are rational, carefully thought out ideas that should be believed if no evidence successfully refutes the intuition. And so, finally, therefore, given these reasons, there's nothing counterintuitive in idealism, and once properly understood, idealism is more intuitive since the properties of the world are all mental, and there is no good reason to assume that there is anything non-mental in reality that is beyond these mental experiences that we are having. And so that will be my video. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.